Because that's what the child's parents and the parents' partner was saying, that these were malicious, they don't approve of our same-sex relationship, and instead what should have happened is getting behind that and taking those concerns very seriously.
Annie Hudson said that when agencies operate in a silo, this can lead to fractured and fragmented decision-making. She believes concerns about a child's welfare and safety are best tackled by one integrated team.
Bringing together the relevant professionals, police, health, social workers, adult mental health and so on. Because only then, if you have one team, and that the analogy we've used in other places is youth offending services, where you have a multi-professional team, that you then actually reduce the likelihood of information falling through the cracks.
The Conservative Education Committee Chair, Robert Halfon, wanted to know whether the Chief Executive of Solihull Council, Nick Page, had considered his position.
I'm just asking you, did you not think it would be the right thing to do?
I did consider
responsibility, and why didn't you resign?
Because of all the levels of accountability, I still believe I have the opportunity and the wherewithal to carry on improving the services.
Even though there's been previous failing services.
Kirsten England of Bradford also said she wasn't resigning and insisted taking responsibility was about staying in position and putting things right. 2 years on, neither council has yet appointed a new director of children's services. Robert Halfon asked her why serious weaknesses were still being identified in their councils.
We would accept that the pace of improvement has been too slow. It is generally observed that the improvement journey when you're inadequate takes up to 3 years, and we embarked on that at the beginning of 2019. We went inadequate at the end of 2018, and then a year and a bit into that we experienced a pandemic which undoubtedly slowed the rate of progress, as did many other councils.
Nick Page said that most of the actions recommended in an independent safeguarding review into Solihull Council had now been implemented.
Thomas Mason. Now, if you're of a certain age and you've been quoted higher travel insurance premiums as a result, Labour's former Home Secretary Lord Blunkett has your back. He wants ministers to talk to the Association of British Insurers.
Many of their members are raising exponentially the fees required for cover for people over 70, 75 and 80.
Lord Blunkett, who turned 75 earlier this month, said only 7% of over 65s made an insurance claim in any given year.
Surely it's possible for us to ensure that people who are living longer, who are fitter, who are able to travel should do so, and to have the cover necessary to make that possible.
Replying for the government, Lady Penn could only offer limited reassurance.
Travel insurance is fundamentally designed to cover medical expenses where age can be a risk factor, and the government does not intend to intervene in commercial decisions made by insurers, as this could damage competition in the market.
A Conservative, Lord Kirkhope, complained that age discrimination wasn't confined to travel insurance.
I understand some good drivers over the age of 70 are being denied the opportunity to hire a car. The reason being given is that there is a failure to obtain insurance for them. Isn't this really unacceptable, bearing in mind the statistics of safe driving of older drivers?
Lady Penn said age could be a risk factor in insurance, and it was right the market could take that into account.
But where there are examples of discrimination that go beyond assessment of the risk factor, that's something for the FCA to consider as the regulator of the market.
Lady Penn, and the FCA is the Financial Conduct Authority, which regulates how insurance companies behave. And that brings us to the closing headline from Westminster. The head of the civil service, Simon Case, said the Partygate scandal was horrifying. He told the committee of MPs that a number of civil servants had since resigned. I'm Sean Curran. The studio manager was Joe Leeds. The editor was David Cornock. And that was Today in Parliament.
BBC News at midnight. This is Charles Carroll. Ghislaine Maxwell has been jailed for 20 years for trafficking teenage girls for the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein to molest. In a statement, she apologised to her victims. The Metropolitan Police Force, the largest in the UK, is to be placed under greater scrutiny by inspectors because of a series of failures. Dame Deborah James, who campaigned to improve awareness of bowel cancer and raised millions for charity, has died of the disease at the age of 40. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has proposed the 19th of October next year as the date for another referendum on independence. Turkey has agreed to support Finland and Sweden joining NATO, ending a rancorous dispute. A former White House aide has given an account of what Donald Trump and senior officials were doing during the riot at the Capitol building last year. Ghislaine Maxwell, once a prominent figure in New York society circles, is tonight facing 20 years in a US federal prison for trafficking young girls to be abused by Jeffrey Epstein. Maxwell, who's 60, looked straight ahead and showed no emotion as a judge passed sentence in front of a packed public gallery. She's issued a statement apologising to her victims, but her family said that she would appeal. Our correspondent, Neda Tawfiq, was in court and has sent this report.
The judge said the 20-year sentence reflected Maxwell's heinous and predatory crimes, and she rejected the defense's claim that Maxwell was being punished in the place of the pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. 5 of her accusers addressed the court and spoke emotionally about the lasting impact of the abuse. Annie Farmer, whose testimony helped convict Maxwell, said outside court that they were celebrating this major victory.
It is never too late for the truth to come out, and never too late for there to be accountability. Maxwell and Epstein were predators who were able to use that power and privilege to harm countless individuals, and for far too long, the institutions that should be protecting the public were instead protecting them. And I still hope that we find out more about how that was allowed to occur.
Maxwell did not look at her victims, but she did address them. She said she was sorry for the pain they had experienced. She also said her association with Epstein, who she described as a manipulative, cunning, controlling man, was the greatest regret of her life. The judge and numerous victims noted that she did not directly take responsibility for her pivotal role in Epstein's sex trafficking operation. The British daughter of the disgraced media tycoon Robert Maxwell ran in the most influential circles, rubbing shoulders with presidents and princes. In court, though, wearing a blue prison uniform and ankle shackles, she was supported by just a few members of her family. Her brother, Kevin Maxwell, said this wasn't the end of their legal challenge.
Ghislaine will be exercising her right to appeal her conviction and sentence, and we, the family, will be solidly behind her all the way.
20 years is less than prosecutors had hoped for. Nevertheless, they say it sends a message that no one is above the law.
The Metropolitan Police Force, the UK's largest, has been placed in special measures by inspectors because of concerns about its performance. Recent cases, such as the murder of Sarah Everard and the stop and search of the athlete Bianca Williams, have prompted strong criticism of the force. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Daniel Sanford, reports.
This decision means Scotland Yard will now face an unprecedented level of scrutiny by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary. The Met will have to present an improvement plan and will get external support from organisations such as the College of Policing. The force is currently without a permanent leader after Dame Cressida Dick was forced to resign by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. A new commissioner is not expected to be announced until August. The Mayor said today that the Met had deep cultural problems and needed root and branch reform.
Trust and confidence in our policing is integral to policing by consent and to address some of the systemic issues raised today by the police inspectorate. It's really important now. We get a new commissioner. We need a commissioner who understands both the challenges, the complexities, but the opportunities of police in this great city and takes Londoners with them.
The Met said it was determined to be a police service London could be proud of and was talking to the inspectorate about the next steps.
The BBC podcaster and bowel cancer campaigner Dame Deborah James has died at the age of 40. In her final weeks, the presenter of You, Me and the Big C raised millions of pounds for research and was made a dame for her work in improving awareness of the disease. John Donnison looks back at her life.
My name is Deborah James.
It was 2016 when, young and at the prime of life, Deborah James found out she had a terminal illness.
I've had everything. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiotherapy to enable me to live with cancer.
Despite the devastating blow, the former deputy head teacher was determined to share her story to try and help others. In upbeat social media clips, she called herself Bowel Babe. She detailed the gruelling rounds of treatment, but also showed herself dancing with her kids and poking fun at the disease. On her podcast, You, Me and the Big C, she was open and funny, but never tried to hide her feelings.
I'm back on treatment, and every single time I'm back on treatment, I'm like, I don't want to be here. I look at like what your wives had to go through, and then what you're having to go through, and do you not look at Freddie and your kids and just think, it's just not fair?
The emotional final episode was on March the 10th.
This podcast is a team effort, isn't it? And it's put all our hearts online.
Shortly after she started end-of-life care, Deborah James was made a Dame by the Queen. The honour was presented to her by the Duke of Cambridge at her parents' home in Woking. For 5 years, Deborah James fought to raise awareness of her disease, and in the words of one cancer charity, the lives her campaign saved, and will continue to save, was nothing short of incredible.
Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has started the process which she says will pave the way for a lawful second referendum on independence next year. Setting a date of October the 19th, 2023, Ms Sturgeon told Holyrood that Scotland's top legal officer, the Lord Advocate, had referred the legitimacy of the poll to the Supreme Court so that no one would be able to question it at a later date. A spokesman for the UK government insisted now wasn't the time for another vote and said ministers would give a considered response in due course. Our Scotland correspondent James Shaw reports from Holyrood.
Nicola Sturgeon's plan to get a ruling at the highest level on the legality of a referendum is designed to work round the UK government's consistent refusal to authorise a new vote, having given permission for one in 2014. In a speech at Holyrood this afternoon, Ms Sturgeon said that this time she would press ahead even without authorisation from Westminster, but the legality of the process had to be beyond doubt. The First Minister argued that in last year's elections for the Scottish Parliament, voters had given their backing to parties in favour of independence, and they should not be, as she put it, held prisoner by Boris Johnson.
Now is the time, at this critical moment in history, to debate and decide the future of our country. Now is the time to get Scotland on the right path, the path chosen by those who live here. Now is the time for independence.
Ms Sturgeon has written to the Prime Minister saying she would still be open to reaching an agreement with him for a new referendum. But since he has consistently opposed one, the application to the Supreme Court may be her best or perhaps only chance of getting a vote before the end of next year. Boris Johnson said he'd not yet had a chance to look in detail at what Ms Sturgeon was proposing, but he insisted that the UK was a stronger economy and a stronger country when together. The leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Douglas Ross, gave this response to the First Minister's statement.
We won't play Nicola Sturgeon's games. We won't take part in a pretend poll when there is real work to be done. Real work on the global cost of living crisis. Real work to invest in public services. Real work to rebuild our economy.
Nicola Sturgeon's route map to a new vote was not widely anticipated. Some will see it as bold. The risk she runs is the Supreme Court ruling that a referendum would be beyond the powers of the Scottish Parliament.
Our Scotland editor, James Cook, considers now what Nicola Sturgeon's latest move in her campaign for independence will mean for relations between Westminster and Holyrood in the months ahead.
As Nicola Sturgeon prepared to address the Scottish Parliament this afternoon, the British state was putting on a show just over the road. At the Palace of Holyrood House, the armed forces were paying tribute to the Queen in an act of loyalty parade, a rare public appearance for the monarch these days. Of course, it's not the 400-year-old union of the Scottish and English crowns which the First Minister wants to dissolve, but the 300-year-old union of the Parliaments. How? Part one of her strategy is to try her luck in the Supreme Court, where many legal scholars expect her to lose. If she does, part two kicks in, fighting the next general election on the single issue of independence to try to generate political rather than legal pressure. For its part, the UK government appears confident that Scottish voters don't want a referendum now, and the polls appear to support that position. But not now is, by definition, not a long-term strategy, unless it's accompanied by a decline in support for independence. Given that polls also suggest leaving the UK is especially popular among younger voters, it's not just Ms Sturgeon who's gambling.
The authorities in Ukraine say dozens of people are still unaccounted for after a Russian missile strike on a shopping centre yesterday. At least 18 people were killed in the blast in the central city of Kremenchuk, and many more were injured. Rescue workers are continuing to search the rubble for survivors. Moscow has denied targeting the shopping complex, instead claiming it struck a nearby warehouse where weapons and ammunition provided by Western nations were being stored. Our correspondent Nick Beak has been visiting the site where it happened and meeting people caught up in the disaster.
When you step inside what remains of the Amstor shopping centre, you soon realise they will find no more survivors. It's absolutely devastated. Everything is blackened. In this specific part of the complex, the rescuers, the emergency services, they say that 11 people died just here. Russia has admitted it fired missiles yesterday, but claimed they landed nearby, starting a fire that spread to the shopping complex, which was empty and not in use. Everyone we met today said those were lies. At a local hospital, they were treating 24 people who were wounded. Sales assistant Maxim tells us there were about 100 customers in his store before the explosion. He can't remember anything after that. But his wife, Victoria, can. She tells us her husband told her on the phone he was trapped in the fire and smoke, but somehow he escaped. Moscow claimed its missiles hit a nearby factory, which was storing US and European military aid. When we visited, we spoke to Svetlana Rybalko from the Regional Emergency Services. Standing next to a large crater and rubble, she denied there were Western weapons here. G7 leaders say the shopping centre strike was a war crime. Ukraine says it's terrorism. And Russia continues to claim it doesn't target civilians.
Leaders of some of the world's richest nations have promised to impose severe and enduring costs on Russia to help stop the war in Ukraine. The G7 group has been meeting for the final day of this year's summit in Germany. They've also pledged nearly £4 billion to help tackle global hunger and malnutrition made worse by the conflict. Our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale, reports from Bavaria.
There may be some differences within Europe about how to tackle Russia's war in Ukraine in the long term, but the G7 leaders used their summit to project diplomatic unity. In their communique, the leaders promised to impose severe and enduring costs on Russia and to stand with Ukraine for as long as it took. Chancellor Scholz of Germany and President Macron of France both said Vladimir Putin could not and must not win. Boris Johnson said the missile attack on Kremenchuk had added to their resolve.
People are just shocked by what Putin is capable of doing. You know, if anything, it helped those of us who are making the case for helping to protect the Ukrainians to get that message across to some of those people who are more swing voters in the argument. They can see that this is utter barbarism.
Those swing voters the Prime Minister referred to are lower income countries concerned about the global food crisis. They blame the rising prices not just on Russia's invasion, but also Western sanctions that add to trade costs. The G7 leaders said they were looking at ways of helping Ukraine export millions of tons of grain currently trapped in silos. They promised an extra £3.7 billion to help protect people from hunger and malnutrition, a figure some aid charities said was far too little. The G7 also said it would explore banning the transportation of Russian oil and gas sold above a maximum price in an attempt to reduce the cost of global energy.
Turkey has agreed to support NATO membership for Finland and Sweden. The three countries have signed a joint memorandum during a meeting at the NATO summit in Madrid. Turkey had opposed the two Nordic nations joining the alliance, accusing them of harbouring Kurdish militants. Both countries had denied supporting terror groups. The memorandum commits all three nations to defending each other against threats to security. Our security correspondent, Frank Gardner, reports from Madrid.
Sooner than many had expected, the NATO summit has achieved an early success. The way has just been cleared for Finland and Sweden to join the 30-member Western military alliance after Turkey dropped its objections. The breakthrough came after the foreign ministers of Sweden, Finland and Turkey, facilitated by NATO's Secretary-General, signed a joint security pact that addressed Ankara's concerns. Turkey had previously objected to the two Nordic nations joining NATO on the grounds that they sheltered Kurdish activists whom Ankara viewed as terrorists. The addition of these two modern Scandinavian democracies to the Atlantic Alliance will further isolate and anger the Kremlin, which sees NATO not as a defensive organization, but as an aggressive one.
As Boris Johnson flew to Madrid for the NATO meeting, it emerged that the government was planning to abandon a manifesto commitment to annual above-inflation increases in defence spending. At the same time, the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, was telling the Royal United Services Institution that changing threats in Europe made it vital for spending on defence to continue to grow in the coming years. More details from our political correspondent, Damien Grammaticus.
The commitment in the Conservative manifesto was to keep defence spending increasing by at least half a percentage point above inflation every year. With inflation surging, it seems that may not be met for at least 1 year. As he headed for the NATO summit, Mr Johnson said he believed the promise would be kept over the lifetime of his government. It has also set aside more than £16 billion to invest in the military over 5 years. But the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace used a speech today to say that the odds of a war in Europe were shortening, and as the threat changed, spending needed to continue to rise beyond 2025.
The threat is growing and is global and is multi-domain. And it is now time to signal that peace dividend is over and investment needs to continue to grow. Before it becomes too late to address the resurgent threat and the lessons learned in Ukraine, it is time to mobilise, to be ready and to be relevant.
Mr Johnson had earlier indicated he believed the threat of war could be contained within Ukraine. And the UK will, he said, continue to spend more than the NATO target of a minimum of 2% of national income on defence every year.
A former White House aide has given a remarkable account of what Donald Trump and his officials were saying during critical hours of the riot at the Capitol building last year. Cassidy Hutchinson was testifying to the House committee investigating the attack by Mr Trump's supporters trying to overturn his election defeat. Barbara Platt-Usher reports from Washington.
Cassidy Hutchinson had given several recorded depositions, but the committee unexpectedly called an urgent hearing so she could testify publicly. It was a riveting hour of explosive revelations. That Donald Trump knew many in the crowd at his White House rally were armed, but still urged them to march on the Capitol. That he was so determined to go with them, he tried to grab the steering wheel of his limousine when told he couldn't. And that a White House lawyer warned he could be charged with every crime imaginable if he did. Ms. Hutchinson provided incriminating details about several people in Mr. Trump's inner circle. The leaders of the committee indicated they would follow up. They suggested outlier witnesses who had refused to cooperate or were reticent with details should reconsider.
President López Obrador of Mexico has blamed trafficking and what he called a lack of control at the U.S. border for the deaths of at least 50 migrants who were abandoned in a lorry in Texas. It's the worst case in the U.S. of migrant deaths due to people smuggling. The White House has called the incident horrific and heartbreaking, but has rejected claims that the Biden administration is responsible. Our Central America correspondent, Will Grant, reports from San Antonio.
The scene inside the truck was a horrific example of the extent to which migrants risked their lives to reach the United States. After the emergency services were called about a body by an abandoned vehicle on the outskirts of San Antonio, they found dozens more inside the unventilated trailer. 16 survivors, including 4 children, were found among the dead. They were taken to a nearby hospital, said San Antonio's Fire Chief Charles Hood.
The patients that we saw were hot to the touch. They were suffering from heat stroke, heat exhaustion, no signs of water in the vehicle. It was a refrigerated tractor trailer, but there was no visible working AC unit on that rig. Again, we're not supposed to open up a truck and see stacks of bodies in there. None of us come to work imagining that.
The Mexican Foreign Minister, Marcelo Ebrard, said 22 of the dead were from Mexico, with others from Guatemala and Honduras. It is expected that the majority will have come from Central America in search of work and opportunities in the U.S. The Republican governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, was quick to blame the Biden administration's immigration policies for the tragedy, accusing President Biden of failing to enforce the law. However, the brutal criminal gangs who operate the people trafficking routes into Texas have abandoned trucks with migrants inside on many occasions along the US-Mexico border, though rarely with so many victims.
Friends of a woman who was killed in East London say she was kind and loving and a lifeline to her family. 35-year-old Zara Alina was assaulted in the early hours of Sunday morning as she walked home in Ilford. A 29-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of her murder. Our Home Affairs correspondent, June Kelly, reports.
With this murder investigation now in its third day, detectives are working through footage from the area around the murder scene in Cranbrook Road in Ilford. Many of the houses here have cameras. The BBC has seen footage from a CCTV camera which has now been passed to the police. Zara Alina's friends have told us that they believe she is the woman in the footage being followed by a man walking quickly towards her a short time before she was attacked. One of them, Jamzan Hussain, spoke about her friend.
She didn't have a bad bone in her. She was kind, she was loving, you know, she was, again, like all her friends and family said, a lifeline for her grandma and her mum. She was just so innocent, so pure. You know, it's just a shock.
Zara Alina's body was found at around 2:45 on Sunday morning near a large house with double wrought iron gates. The police cordons have gone and now there are flowers and messages. Detectives believe this was a stranger murder. They are rare, but they underline the ongoing concerns about women's safety. At the scene of this latest killing, there is a piece of cardboard tied to the railings, which reads, "Say her name, Zara Alina." Over the past year, the same poignant message has been left at other crime scenes to remember other women whose lives have also been taken.
A Hindu shopkeeper has been killed in the northern Indian city of Udaipur, raising communal tension in the area. A video of the murder by two Muslim men was later circulated on social media. They warned the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, of a similar fate. Rajini Vaidyanathan reports from Delhi.
Police say two Muslim men entered Kanhaiyalal's tailoring shop in Udaipur, posing as customers. They then slit his throat with a cleaver. They'd tried to behead him, say the authorities. The murder was filmed, then shared on social media by the attackers, who gloated on camera. They were also seen making threats towards India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. Local media say the victim, a Hindu, had recently shared online posts in support of the former spokesperson for the governing BJP, Nupur Sharma, who'd made inflammatory comments about the Prophet Muhammad. In a country which has seen a rise in religious violence between Hindus and Muslims, this barbaric crime has left many shocked.
The population of England and Wales has increased by more than 3.5 million in 10 years, according to results from the census released today by the Office for National Statistics. The 6% rise since 2011 takes the total population of England and Wales to 59.6 million, the highest figure ever. Our home editor, Mark Easton, has the details.
Where were you on Sunday, March the 21st last year? The 2021 census found the number of people answering that question with "in England" was almost 56.5 million. In Wales was the response from 3.1 million. Big numbers, but not actually as big as expected. The official projection for the population of England and Wales was 600,000 higher than it proved to be. That's a worry for some areas because local authority funding is based on population.